whether JavaScript makes sense in the enterprise. So of course, over the years there's been a lot of innovation and development in the JavaScript ecosystem. And the question to ask is whether you can use JavaScript, whether it makes sense in the context of enterprise applications. I'm a technology evangelist. I work at Oracle. Aside from being focused on JavaScript and enterprise technologies, I'm also, I've been very involved for many years with an open source tool called NetBeans IDE, which is useful for doing Java development or JavaScript development or any kind of development you want, really, which currently is moving to Apache. So NetBeans is becoming an Apache project. There's an event tomorrow at the Bangalore Jug about NetBeans, so you're free to attend that event. There's quite a lot of people signed up, and there'll be about 6-7 different speakers talking about different technologies in the context of NetBeans. The reason why JavaScript, I think, has become so popular over the past years is because of the browser. The browser is a platform that is available on all devices. The browser is on mobile devices, it's on tablets, it's on your laptop, it's on your desktop. If you write applications that target the browser, you know that your users will be able to access that application everywhere. And specifically, I'm talking here about front-end development. So I'm asking the question whether JavaScript makes sense as a language and as an ecosystem for doing front-end development. I really come from a Java background. I've been a Java developer since the previous century, I suppose one could say. And I've been promoting enterprise technologies for a long time. And I really like Java Swing, for example, and desktop technologies. I really like Java. I like the type system. I like the ecosystem. I like the community. I don't like JavaScript as a language. I don't like the JavaScript ecosystem because it's unstable. You don't know what's coming next week. You start using some library, and the next week those libraries are not being developed anymore. Things don't work together. There are no overarching specifications like Java EE. So I don't like the language because it's not typed, and you need to include some other thing called TypeScript with it if you want to use types in your programming. So I'm not a fan of JavaScript in any way. On the other hand, I realize that JavaScript is embedded in the browser. JavaScript is the native language of the browser. And therefore, it makes sense that larger organizations especially ask themselves whether JavaScript, despite being problematic, is not the right way to do front-end development. Because JavaScript is there already, why would you use an abstraction over JavaScript to get to the browser? Why not try and natively use JavaScript as it is, despite its problems? So what I want to do in this session is basically give you a non-JavaScript fan's perspective on JavaScript and tips. I'm going to give you 10 tips for approaching this JavaScript ecosystem in a sensible way. From a kind of Java background, from the background of somebody who sees the problems in JavaScript. Of course, it's great that JavaScript is constantly innovating and that there are new libraries and new ideas and new technologies coming out every week. But if you are creating serious business applications, that's not a good thing. You want a stable environment. You don't want something that's constantly changing. So organizations like Tesco, for example, so here's an example of an app at Tesco. It's a time scheduling application on the mobile device, written in JavaScript, for the employees at Tesco to manage their time and to say whether or not they're available and to swap slots with each other. And there's a marketplace where you could put your time slot and you can sell it to your colleagues and all kinds of interesting things like that. After this session, there's another session by me in room SD Hall 2, which is quite far away, but it's called Office Hours with me. And basically, any questions that you would like to ask in an informal manner please feel free to come to that. It won't be formally structured, but here are some of the things that I would like to, or maybe that you would like to ask or talk about. So I think the most interesting position that you can have in IT is technology evangelism. Just in the past week, I've been to 4 or 5 different conferences. Actually, I don't remember exactly how many. And the next weeks there are more. There are conferences all over the world where you can get invited to go to, and you meet other enthusiastic people, other speakers and other people at the conference, and you learn new things all the time, and you're constantly traveling. It's a very hidden function, it's a very hidden job in the IT sector. And I can give you tips on how you can become a technology evangelist. You can become a technology evangelist today. And I will give you some insights into that. Also, I'm working at Oracle, and at Oracle we're doing a lot of stuff with JavaScript. I won't have a lot of time to go into that in this session, but maybe you want to come and talk about that. Also, I mentioned NetBeans. If you want to come and ask and discuss about NetBeans, what's new in NetBeans, what are the cool features, if you want to see some demos, or if you want to talk about Apache NetBeans. So all these kinds of things are completely open to you to come and discuss. So that's in SD Hall 2 at 1740, an open-ended session where we can discuss whatever you want. So I'm from Amsterdam, and in the Netherlands, and this photo was very famous on Twitter in the Netherlands a few years ago. What you see is the most famous Dutch painting. It is The Night Watch by Rembrandt. It's in the main museum in Amsterdam. And what you see in front of that painting is a group of kids with their backs turned to this great piece of art, bent over their mobile devices. So this picture came on Twitter, and it was almost a national scandal. It was almost that the Prime Minister had to answer questions about this. Because of course this is terrible. This is the end of the world. This is, these kids looking at Facebook and being distracted, looking at other things, and it was a low point in the cultural history of the Netherlands. However, it turned out that what they were doing was they were researching the paintings that they had just been looking at. And a few seconds before that picture was taken, and they were engaged in the art that that was around them. They were not distracted from it. Their mobile device wasn't distracting them, but was engaging them. And so me, and I'm sure many other people, as a skeptic of the whole JavaScript development, of the mobile phone development with all these apps, sometimes you need to think, on the other hand, there is, of course, this engagement aspect that the mobile phone provides. And JavaScript is very well placed to provide these kinds of apps, since, as I said, JavaScript is the native language of the browser. The browser is on mobile phones. You could create a museum app in JavaScript, write it once, and make it available to all devices via Cordova to compile from JavaScript down to native or semi-native hybrid format. Or you could invest in iOS and in Android and in Windows and in each different device type. So I think JavaScript has a place. And again, the purpose of this session is to explore what that space is and how to sensibly how to sensibly react to this clear innovation and this new requirement around JavaScript. So I'm explicitly not a JavaScript advocate. I'm not an advocate of the browser platform. I really like Java, and on the back end, I think Java is a perfect fit for these kinds of mobile apps or browser apps in the desktop and so on. Java is perfectly placed as a back end, providing RESTful endpoints that you can integrate into the front end, which typically nowadays would be expressed in JavaScript. So I'm not commenting at all about what goes on the back end. I would definitely not recommend Node.js on the back end. I think that's taking JavaScript really too far, but that's maybe just me, it's just an opinion. I'm looking forward, or not really looking forward, to seeing millions of lines of code written in JavaScript. I mean, that's just hard to imagine. That's not what JavaScript is meant for. It's not meant for air traffic control systems. It's not meant for highly scientific applications. It's meant for a subset of applications. And that's kind of the argument that I want to make and give you some tips and tricks in the process. Of course, this is the wonderful thing about JavaScript, and at the same time the problem. There are so many choices and so many options and so many libraries and so many frameworks and so many enthusiastic people. You go to a conference and every session you learn about some new amazing JavaScript library. And you then go and play with that library and you try and integrate it. But there isn't really a cohesive, overarching JavaScript methodology or way of tying these together. Every library, every framework comes up with their own new solutions. So JavaScript happens. It's around us. So the question is, how do we deal with this simple fact? So here are the 10 tips I want to talk about. Really, I would call these the 10 building blocks to getting a sensible perspective on the JavaScript world. First of all, I'm going to talk about resisting the hype, about not adopting things just because they're new. Secondly, I'm going to look at HTML5 in a new way. I mean, everyone is probably aware that HTML5 is all about multimedia and video and audio and things like that, but it's actually about more than that. There are a number of additional features that are very relevant to application development that I want to talk about. I also want to talk about responsive design, and typically we solve this problem in the JavaScript world via CSS. But in fact, JavaScript provides better solutions, and I want to compare the CSS approach to responsive design to the JavaScript approach. Then the biggest problem in this ecosystem, of course, is all these libraries and frameworks. How do we choose which ones to use? I want to talk a bit about modularity, very important for larger applications, about the abstractions that there are over these different technologies, about not worrying. Don't worry about the volatility of the ecosystem is a key message I want to bring. And if you are worried in the context of your application, maybe that means that this is not the right place for your application. If your application isn't suitable to this volatility in the ecosystem, then maybe your application belongs on in a different platform, on the Java desktop or written in .NET or in some other way. I want to introduce you to a concept called wanta instead of wara. So instead of write once, run anywhere, I want to talk about a different term. We're going to look at corporate frameworks. I think this is the most interesting development over the past years in JavaScript, that large organizations like Oracle and Microsoft and Salesforce and SAP are all doing things in JavaScript now. The front end of a lot of technologies and solutions coming out of the large enterprises are JavaScript nowadays. That wasn't true 2 or 3 years ago. So that really shows that JavaScript is stabilizing. And I want to address that and the different solutions that there are. And finally, I want to suggest to you that potentially JavaScript may not be a programming language, but an assembly language. And I want to address that in some different ways. So first of all, I want to talk about the topic of resisting the hype. So there's this amazing plate of cookies with wonderful promises that JavaScript makes available, including promise itself, of course, in ECMAScript 6. And it's very attractive and appealing, and everyone talks about it, and you go to conferences, and everyone is very excited about JavaScript. And the point I want to make is, don't go for the hype. It doesn't work for every situation. You might find yourself writing a JavaScript application for the next 6 months, and then finding after 6 months that it doesn't really scale, it's too hard, it's a mess of code that's unmaintainable, these kinds of things, because it's not a silver bullet. Imagine, for example, that you are writing an air traffic control system. Do you want to write your air traffic control system as a mobile application? Probably not. Air traffic controllers need a very large screen. They don't need a tiny screen of a mobile device for looking at the sky and determining where the planes are flying. There are a lot of systems that simply need a large resolution. A very simple example of why a mobile app might not be appropriate. Another one is there are many situations where all your users are in the same room. So again, air traffic control system. All the users could be 20 or 40 air traffic controllers that are in the same room. What's the point of writing an app for the browser on their desktop? If they're all in the same room, why not use the Java desktop, write a Java desktop application? You have full access to everything on the system. You have a much more secure application. Plus, the browser doesn't make any sense there. The browser is very useful if you're creating an application that everyone or many people in the world, in different countries, all need to access at the same time. But if you don't have that situation, then maybe JavaScript isn't the appropriate solution for you. So what will happen despite that, despite the fact that an air traffic control system doesn't belong on a mobile phone, despite that, the manager of the developers and the manager of the users are going to say, yes, but JavaScript is really cool. We need to use this. We need to rewrite our whole system to JavaScript. It's always management-driven, these kinds of unnecessary changes, because it's the new and the new hyped thing. So I want to give you a tip here. Instead of rewriting the whole application to JavaScript that you have nicely on the desktop, and instead of fighting with your manager, you can say to your manager, instead of rewriting everything, let's supplement our existing system with these technologies and these devices. Let's create a mobile app for emergencies and for notifications that are coming from the planes in the sky. Let's write a web app for reports and the status of various things so that the managers of the air traffic controllers can get a very quick view on the current status of the flights. But let's leave the actual management of the sky on the desktop. So let's supplement that existing system with these new devices and technologies. Let's not try and replace everything. In the same way as with the arrival of the DVD, it doesn't mean that all the VHSs should go out the window. There's a place for your VHS and there's a place for your DVD. The one doesn't replace the other, and try and make that argument. Secondly, after this hype point, I want to take a new look at HTML5. So HTML5 actually provides a lot more than you might think. HTML originally was all about marking up scientific documents. And of course, in the meantime, we don't only work with scientific documents in the browser, we also work with multimedia devices. We work with video and audio and these kinds of rich content. And that's why HTML5 is there. You know, you have these audio tags and video tags and so on. But actually, HTML5 is a lot more than that. HTML5 has very specific data-oriented components. And I'll give you a very quick demo of that. So I'm going to run this application into the browser, start it up, and you can see here is my text. And I'm going to just undock this little palette here. I'm going to float it. Okay, so we have a single H1. Did you know that you can natively in HTML do code completion, an auto-completion component? And I'll show you that. So here, there is a little bit of scripting, but the main point here is that we can see that there is an input element here, which has a list attribute, and there is a data list element below that. And this one is attached to this one via the list attribute, which has its value, country, as the same value as the ID of the data list. Now, back in my browser, let's also remove that hello message at the end there. Back in my browser, what I see is a code completion item. So I can start typing in here, and I can get various countries from that list. And you can see that this filtering is also built in. You don't need jQuery, and you don't need special widgets for this. This is simply native HTML. Natively, HTML provides an input element with type set to text and with a list attribute that ties it to a data list, and the data list is automatically filtered by all the browsers that support HTML5, which is all the browsers. All the latest browsers support HTML5. So this is typically a component you would expect in an application. This is not something that is relevant to scientific documents. This is not something that is relevant to audio and video and so on. This is really an application framework type component. And HTML5 provides a number of components just like this. So this tip here is for you to consider re-examining the HTML5 specification, because there are a lot of components just like that. So we've looked at this input element with its type set to text and its list bound to a data list. So tip number 2, HTML5 provides more than you think. Tip number 3, CSS and JavaScript. So when we do responsive design, typically we think that CSS is the appropriate response, the appropriate way to do media queries. So you think that with CSS, what you can do is you can say, if the resolution is like this, then show this, and if the resolution is like that, then show that. However, what CSS media queries do is quite different to what you might think. And I will show you that by means of a quick example. So here we have a very simple starting point for an application in the browser. You can see that there is a logo, Coca-Cola, and there is a menu bar, and there's a text. And that when we make this application smaller, so we imagine that we're accessing the application from a mobile device, that logo disappears. And that's because as developers of the application, we think, well, we have a lot of space to show that logo on the browser on the desktop, but when we are on the mobile device, we have less space. So we don't want to show that logo, that big, large logo. Now, if we were to make use of CSS media queries, what would be happening is that that logo would be shown and hidden, depending on the resolution. So CSS3 media queries either show or hide DOM elements. However, what you would prefer is that that DOM element is loaded and unloaded, physically removed from the page. And I will show you that that is actually happening here. This is not showing and hiding. This is loading and unloading dynamically. So here we have our application. And next to that, we have our development environment. And in our development environment, we have a little tool that gives a view on the browser content. So a live DOM view. I'm going to connect these two together. So let's make this one. So you can see here, I have a plugin installed into my browser, which connects the browser to my development environment. And now you can see that as I move my mouse, different parts become highlighted. And back in the development environment, I can see where I am. So I have now selected that logo, and this is a little bit small. So let's see them next to each other. So I've selected that logo, and now I've selected something down here, and now you can see that automatically in the development environment, that DOM element that I have selected is highlighted there. Okay, so we select this, this logo, and here it is, logo. Okay, so if we were using CSS3, as I make the browser smaller, that logo would remain in the DOM. However, you can see that that div element is removed. It is there and it is gone, depending on the resolution. And this is a very, very useful and magical thing, which is made possible by a specific library called Response.js. Response.js provides the ability in JavaScript to set breakpoints in your code. And then you can say in your code, if this breakpoint is hit, then show this, or set this variable under that condition. And we can see this, in fact, directly in our code. We can see here that there is a variable set, and here is how it is set, via response.js. So here we say in JavaScript, create the following breakpoints, first of all. And then we have here response action, which, depending on the breakpoints, either sets or unsets our variable. And similarly, there's another very useful library called foundation interchange. So in the first example, we were looking at response. Now, secondly, there's something called foundation interchange, which again has the concept of breakpoints. So there is small, medium, and large. And if the breakpoint is hit, we will either load or unload a different HTML fragment into our application. So this tip is really valuable when you're doing media queries. Here is response.js, and there is also foundation interchange to look at. Don't be misled by CSS3. Use JavaScript instead for doing your responsive design. Okay, so then tip number 4, the evaluation of these different libraries. There are many libraries out there. How do you choose which ones to use? A few years ago, Backbone was very popular. Everyone said Backbone is the way to do the front end of a browser-based application. And then it was Angular. And everyone was very excited about Angular. And then people discovered Angular 2 isn't really backward compatible with Angular 1, so now we have to rewrite everything to Angular 2 in TypeScript, because that's what Angular 2 does, TypeScript. And so many people are now looking at React, because React, this moment where you have to rewrite your application anyway to Angular 2, you might as well explore other options. So now people are looking at React because Facebook has come out with React a few years ago, and it's nice because Facebook is backing React and using it itself, so it makes it a reliable thing to look at. So constantly there are new libraries coming out, and a choice you make today in a few years' time is going to be out of date. For many applications in that space, it doesn't really matter. Many applications in the space of JavaScript, especially for mobile development, the applications are written once, published to the App Store, and then the developers work on the next application. They publish that to the App Store. And then they get requirements for the first application, and they write a new application. And they publish that to the App Store. So a lot of developers are not, a lot of teams are not updating that first application that they wrote. They're just writing a new one, because now there are new libraries. So it's a very different ecosystem to what I'm used to from a Java point of view. There are many different libraries that you can experiment with and play with. Aside from the front-end libraries that I mentioned, there's also Ember, there's also module systems, there's Yeoman, code generator on the command line, there's Bower for dependency management, there's Protractor and all these testing frameworks, there's Ionic on top of Angular, many different choices to make. What you typically do is you try and organize these into different groups, and then, for example, for the build systems, you spend some time learning how to do Grunt. Grunt as a build system for JavaScript. So then you are comfortable with Grunt and you're very happy, and you tell your friend, I know how Grunt works. And then your friend says to you, yes, but now everyone is using Gulp. And then you learn Gulp. And then you're very proud of your Gulp knowledge, and someone tells you, yes, but Brunch. Apparently Brunch is the new Gulp. Really. So on the other hand, you're constantly learning. It's a good thing. You're constantly learning. You're constantly learning new things because there are constantly new libraries. But again, very unstable for the enterprise. Very unstable. In general, there are two approaches that you can take. The one is to take the framework approach. To say, I'm going to buy into a whole framework. And the typical framework there is Angular. Angular.js provides a complete ecosystem, very closed. You can't really add things to it. It's many books, a lot of courses you can take, a lot of questions are answered on Stack Overflow, very good, very reliable, and so on, except when you need to upgrade to the next version of Angular, because there they have made different choices and it becomes difficult. So the other approach is to take the library approach, to choose a few libraries and to combine those libraries together, and when things change, replace the libraries. Now this is the approach that we are taking at Oracle. At Oracle we have something called Oracle JET, oraclejet.org. It's free and open source, and this is what is used inside Oracle for the front end of applications. It's a very humble toolkit. With Oracle JET, the message is not, this is the answer to everything, like Angular, this is the answer to everything. The message of Oracle JET is, here is a small toolbox with things that you are likely to need. You are likely to need jQuery. You're likely to need some data visualization components. You're likely to need data binding. And this toolbox is free and open source, is heavily used inside Oracle itself. So about 70% of Oracle's front-end applications nowadays are written by means of this mechanism. And you are able to use it too. Another approach is provided by PayPal. So PayPal has a very interesting solution called Kraken. Inside PayPal, they have been using not only JavaScript on the front end, but also the back end. So they do Node on the back end. And if you like Node on the back end and you like Express on the front end, then you should be happy because PayPal likes that combination too. And they have open sourced that solution. And so now you can use that as the basis of your application. In addition, what this makes possible is for PayPal to go to developer conferences and have the VP of PayPal talk to developers and say, hey, look, we are doing open source, come and work for us. Oracle can go to conferences and say, hey, look, we're doing open source, come and work for us. All these big organizations are competing with each other for the cool new developers. And via open source, so the open source route makes it possible for organizations to do this. So Kraken is one, and Oracle JET is another one, where this library approach, this slightly less monolithic approach is taken. And it's very nice because in the case of Oracle JET, the chosen libraries are, amongst others, Require.js and Knockout. So what happens if Knockout in a few years isn't the most modern library? It already isn't the most modern library. Well, it can be taken out and replaced with something else. And what happens if Require isn't the most useful way to express modules? Well, you can take out Require, put something else in. You will need to rewrite parts of your application, but you will need to rewrite parts of your application anyway. There's one thing you know for sure. If you go into the JavaScript world, that you are going to have to rewrite your application at some point. The only question is, can you manage that change? Can you anticipate that? And the way to anticipate that is to have the right architecture. One where you are not locked in to a particular philosophy, but where you can take out the individual components and the libraries and replace them with new ones. So the most important thing, more than ever, is architecture.
Excuse me, I have a question.
Yes?
So one of the things with the enterprise, at least not in terms of the web, but normal enterprise apps use a lot of companies write once and basically maintain the code.
Yeah.
So are you saying when Oracle develops these mobile apps, they write once and then throw it away?
No, it depends. I mean, it depends. Not normally, but it's possible. I mean, it is possible. But typically in the enterprise, I don't think that's what you do. In the enterprise, you want to maintain something for a long time, right? So you need an architecture enabling you to do that. And maintaining for a long time means being able to replace libraries as new libraries come up and as other ones become obsolete. So yeah, there's the approach of write once, never touch again, which is what I'm going to be talking about in a bit as well. But that's not typically what the enterprise does, indeed. So the next point I want to make is to incorporate modularity. So larger applications need some kind of module system, and in the latest version of JavaScript, ECMAScript 6, modularity is built in. But it wasn't built in for a long time, so there are various libraries that you can use for loose coupling communication without being locked into a particular mechanism. There's Require, and there's Browserify, and there's System.js, which is part of Angular. Choose one of them. Choose some modularity solution. Choose something. Don't go without modules if you're creating enterprise applications. I mean, this is really the focus of this talk. If you're doing enterprise development, you're going to need some modularity solution to break your application into smaller parts. Also, you don't necessarily need to write directly in JavaScript, CSS, and HTML. You can write in the abstractions over it. So the abstractions include things like TypeScript and CoffeeScript over JavaScript, Sass and Less over CSS, and Emmet, which is a very useful little library, Emmet.io. So Emmet, has anyone here heard of Emmet? Okay, 1 or 2 people. It's not very amazing, but it's handy. And there are plugins for all the editors and IDEs for this. So instead of typing all of that, what you type is that. You type div and a forward arrow, ul, forward arrow, li, forward arrow. You press enter in your editor and it generates all of that for you. So it's a very small little syntax for simplifying the writing of HTML content. In most editors and IDEs, you have some kind of HTML generator thing, but Emmet is a kind of generic one that you can use in all your different editors and IDEs. They all have a plugin for this. It's not amazing, but it's pretty useful. Okay, tip number 7, don't worry about the volatility of this ecosystem. Things are constantly changing. And so here are some comments on that. So in general, the lifespan of your app equals the lifespan of the frameworks you're using. That's kind of the way it is in this JavaScript ecosystem. Every 2 years or so, all your library versions change, or you get new libraries or something, and you basically need to rewrite some or a lot of your application. If you are writing an air traffic control system of millions of lines of code, that's not appropriate. You want an application that's going to be consistent and maintainable for 20 years. But if you're writing a smaller mobile app of some kind of booking application or some travel application, then this makes sense. But this has consequences. So I'm concerned about the quality of a lot of applications being written because of the fact that a lot of developers know that no one is going to come back and work on it again. People are writing it once, publishing it, and then moving on to the next thing. This is going to have consequences, especially if these applications are written in the enterprise. If they're doing important mission-critical things in the police force or something, or things like that. So for example, I hear of police force apps like on tablets, where you have to fill in many different fields. But this is more about usability than anything. But you have to fill in many fields, and at the bottom there's a text box that says miscellaneous. So guess what happens? There's an incident, the police go to the incident, they leave out all the other fields, it's much too much work, and they fill in miscellaneous box. And of course, it's completely impossible to analyze anything, because everything is written in text in the miscellaneous box. But it's not so much about JavaScript, but just a story about usability. But there are all kinds of different ways in which things can be badly designed. And I think this is true in this case as well. If you know that your application isn't going to be developed much further, then maybe you won't spend as much time doing design on it. So this could have all kinds of consequences in the enterprise. So don't worry, be happy. If you're not happy about the volatility of the ecosystem for your software, then maybe your software belongs in another place. So here is the related term connected to this picture. Instead of write once, run anywhere, write once, never touch again. If this works for you, it works for you. In the enterprise, this typically doesn't work. In the enterprise, typically you want your application to last for many years. So now, the more serious point, evaluate what corporations are doing. Take a look at what large organizations are doing in JavaScript that they weren't doing a few years ago. So Microsoft has many solutions, IBM, Salesforce, SAP has SAP UI5 and Fiori, you might have heard of this. ING has on GitHub its own framework called Spectacular. I mentioned PayPal, and as an example of these, I'll talk a little bit about Oracle Jet. I'll talk a little bit about Oracle Jet in this context. So why are these organizations interested in JavaScript? Again, because the browser is on all devices, and because all of these organizations are now positioning themselves as cloud organizations. If you go to a session by IBM, by Oracle, by SAP, the first or second word in the session will be cloud. Where in the past, the talk would be about database and about all kinds of hardware-related things. Now everyone is talking about the cloud. And what does the cloud mean? The cloud, in practical terms, means there is data on somebody's server and it is managed in some special way. But in the end, you want to do something with that data. You don't want to store data only. You also want to create applications that look appealing and attractive and visually interesting. You don't want to simply have text in the browser. You want to have visual components that render that data in interesting ways. And also, you have all kinds of enterprise requirements. Responsive design, you have modularity that you're thinking about, single-page application architecture. You want your application to be accessible by screen readers and by external devices because there are all kinds of requirements about people with disabilities being able to access your software for large enterprises. You have concerns about internationalization, about security, about standards. These are not concerns you have when you're creating a small game. These are enterprise concerns, documentation and support. So these are the concerns that you have. So Oracle JET is one of these solutions that tries to answer all of these different problems. And I've already mentioned this, that it's not a framework. It's even not a library, it's not jet.js, it's a toolbox with different solutions that consist of require for modularity and knockout for data binding and jQuery and all kinds of logical things that you would need. It also includes free and open source visual components, graphs and charts that you can use for free that are written on top of jQuery UI. You don't have to use these in the context of Jet. You could take these and put them into an Angular application or into any application because these are based on jQuery UI. That's a nice thing about following standards. So you have that, and the kinds of applications that you create can be all kinds of different ones with these kinds of visual components. So the starting point is to use Yeoman and Node. So you install Yeoman, you install Grunt, and you say yo Oracle Jet. If you've used Yeoman, instead of yo Angular, you say yo Oracle Jet. It sets up your application for you, and when you run that application, before you do anything else, this is what it will look like. Not what you would see, yes. So you can see here we have a starting point for an application. There are tabs along the top for different purposes, opening up different pages. And when we make the application look like a mobile app, it has automatically this side menu thing that you would expect on a mobile device. So this has responsive design built into the template. You can do all kinds of interesting things, like add graphs and charts from the cookbook right there. You can also integrate with external components. So there's a library called DevExtreme, which provides some very interesting enterprise components. You go to devexpress.com, you'll find this, this toolkit of components like a scheduler, like this, like a timetable type component in JavaScript, which you can drag and drop into your application and use and set a calendar type component, timetable component like that. What you can also do is you have solutions for internationalization. So you can imagine that inside Oracle there are many different organizations at work, and we don't want each of the organizations to be worried about translating the components that they're using. So you can see here that this is a date and time picker, which is one of the components from Oracle Jet. But when I hover my mouse over the images there, I can see select date and select time. Now when it's French, I can see here a French text. And when it's Czech, it's a Czech text. And when it's Arabic, you can see that there's right to left support, and now we have Arabic text. So all these components are translated automatically by the Oracle Jet team into different languages so that you don't have to do that. So there are ideas about internationalization. What is also interesting is that there are ideas about widgets. So you can take a look at this. So these are two of my customers who I've rendered in a very interesting widget type thing. So imagine that a colleague of mine looks at this application and thinks, I would like to use that widget too. So the nice thing is, is that that widget is defined within a specific folder, and it follows the web component standard. So I can take this folder that defines that widget, and I can zip it up and I can send it to my colleague, and they can unzip it into their application, and they can use it like this. So you can see here that I have a custom element created called demo card, defined by that folder with that content. And now wherever I want, I can have this widget. Now, since I can zip that up and distribute it to my colleague, imagine if there was a marketplace. I could zip this up and upload it to a marketplace and sell it. And this is one thing that's being worked on in Oracle, a marketplace for web components. And since these components follow the web component standard, you could imagine components written in React or in Angular or in some other framework or library also being applicable in the same way. So somebody could write a React component and incorporate that into an Oracle Jet application. And all of the Oracle applications are going to be extensible in this way. So I just want to, as an example of what's going on in this space in the enterprise. And everything here is free and open source. And we're going around to conferences and everywhere else. If you want to create dashboard applications, these are the kinds of effects you can create. The final point I want to make is if you really don't like JavaScript as a programming language, as a last resort, what you can do is you can look at it as assembly language. And by that I mean this is assembly language. So you might think, okay, so what does JavaScript have to do with assembly language? Well, this is JavaScript, right? This is JavaScript. Okay, it's minified and all kinds of things, but still, it looks a lot like assembly language to me. And assembly language is a language written for a particular system. In this case, the system is the browser. The language exists only for the system, just like any other assembly language, which means it should be possible to write that program in some other language and then somehow transpile it or compile it down to the assembly language that the system needs. Well, if you have that approach, there are a lot of different options, especially from a Java background. You should take a look. There's a very interesting site on GitHub. If you go to, if I have it here, github.com/jashkennis. You can find it online. CoffeeScript Wiki, a list of languages that compile to JS. Now, if you want evidence of the popularity of JavaScript, take a look at this page, because every imaginable programming language can be transpiled down to JavaScript, which isn't true for other languages. People aren't converting their language to some other language except for JavaScript. Python, Scala, Ruby, Lisp, OCaml, Haskell, Smalltalk, any language you can imagine can be compiled down to JavaScript. So in the Java space, I would recommend you to take a look, if you like this approach, at Vaadin.com, which is maybe the most popular one. Vaadin is based on top of Google Web Toolkit. It is a UI library with charts and graphs and things like that on top of Grid, on top of Google Web Toolkit. Another one is called Gluon. Here it is, Gluon, gluonhq.com. And while we wait for that, let's go to the other one. Another one is called Codename1. And the final one is called JukeScript. So Vaadin, Gluon, Codename1, and JukeScript. What these are all focused on is letting you write your application in Java and in some way taking that Java code and compiling it down to JavaScript. Each of these are also very relevant for mobile devices, so you can create hybrid applications from these two. So here's Codename1. You can create very attractive, interesting applications in Java. Interesting thing about JukeScript is you can write your business logic in Java, but your view in HTML. So you can imagine giving your view layer, so your HTML files, to a web designer. And they design the whole thing, give it back to you, and you can hook that view into your Java code. There's a special mechanism for actually based on Knockout. So if you know Knockout, that is the library that is used to connect that view to the Java code. So there's JukeScript. Also, what's interesting with JavaScript is there are Maven archetypes for this. So you use a Maven command, pulls down a set of archetypes, you write your code once, you build, and from that build, you get your APK file, your iOS file, and your desktop via JavaFX, and there's also JavaScript. Gluon has the same concept, similar concept, and Vaadin as well. So these are my 10 building blocks for a sensible approach to JavaScript that I've discussed. So resist the hype, fight against JavaScript. I think it is a necessary evil. I think if you're going to make the mistake of using JavaScript, then you should do it in a sensible way. And these are the approaches, the ideas that you can use. So before actually touching JavaScript, look at HTML5, look at compare CSS to JavaScript, and evaluate the different frameworks and the libraries, choose the least horrible one, incorporate modularity into all of this, and look at the abstractions, and evaluate whether your software is a good fit for this volatile ecosystem. Definitely look at what the corporations are doing. So I'm a product manager in Oracle focused on this Oracle Jet technology. And I think for what it does, it's really good. Despite being a JavaScript skeptic, I think, I would say if you're going to make the mistake of doing JavaScript, then use Oracle Jet, because this is a very humble collection of loose libraries that don't depend on each other. You can pick and choose what you like. There are very nice graphs and charts. It's all based on standard. It's all jQuery UI and web components, and Oracle is heavily invested in this, so it's not going to go away. Many applications in Oracle, when they are modernized, when people write their applications in JavaScript, they don't have to in Oracle. I mean, there's Apex, there's ADF, there's many Oracle-specific technologies. But if an organization decides to use JavaScript instead, then they will do it in the Jet way, because it's Oracle's standardized architecture and philosophy for doing front-end JavaScript. Back-end, Java, it's very little Node used inside Oracle. This is purely a front-end solution. And finally, you can really look at these other libraries and solutions and technologies, so you can keep on writing Java code despite the fact that the browser needs JavaScript as assembly language. Question, yes?
A little bit about the framework versus library debate.
Yes, yes.
So, I come from this, I'm a fan of libraries first.
Yes.
Extensively using Backbone
right.
to something like Angular
right.
or React. But one such observation that I've had is that with time, especially if you have a larger group of developers in a team, it gets much more complex to manage a library-oriented approach,
right.
as versus an idiomatic framework, which basically enforces a very strict
Right,
discipline.
right.
So how do you basically enforce discipline in a library-first approach? As in, how does it work?
Well, I mean, speaking from an Oracle point of view, this Oracle Jet tries to solve that problem. We're not picking random libraries throughout Oracle. We've selected a few.
In terms of usage.
Yeah.
So in terms of scope, so even when picking, like nailing down the backbone,
yeah.
I find that there's more than one way to do things.
Right.
Something like that.
So,
that's where I think the framework sort of helps by basically forcing you to do something in a particular way.
Yeah.
Because what happens is that even if there are 5 developers in a team, each of them end up implementing something in their own way.
Yeah.
When to use a view, when not to use a view,
Yeah.
when does someone use a collection. Each one, it's left to their expression.
Well, what we have in the architecture of an Oracle Jet application is a view models folder by default and a views folder. Every module in an application has the same name in the JavaScript as in the HTML, and they're organized in a specific way. So we have a convention over configuration built into the architecture of these applications to avoid exactly that. And also, when you join a different team in Oracle, you don't have to first spend time understanding the structure of the application that you're working on, because it's the same structure as the one that you're working on before. So we have a common set of templates and architectures and ideas Although you can change and override all of this, this is the default way that all the applications are structured. So this is one way that we have responded to that problem. Yes?
Is there any other programming language?
I'm sorry, I can't hear you. I'm destroying everything.
Is there any other programming language that works in browsers?
JavaScript is the native language of the browser, and that's it.
Is there anything research being done?
Yes, I believe so. I believe Microsoft and a couple of other companies are looking into alternative languages in the browser, and yeah.
We are ultimately today transferring TypeScript and Dart, both are eventually.
Not that way. The one natively for.
I mean, I think JavaScript is basically, that's the way it is in the browser. We have to just deal with it. We can hope for another language, but it will take a long time for that to come before it's stable or whatever. I think we have to just accept JavaScript is there and deal with it. Okay, thanks very much for coming. Thank you.